The Johnson family had always seemed picture-perfect from the outside. Alex Johnson was the epitome of a hard-working provider, a dedicated father, and a loving husband. A software engineer by trade, he had spent the last decade building a comfortable life for his wife, Emily, and their 12-year-old daughter, Sophie. Their home in the quiet suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, was a sanctuary, a cozy two-story with a white picket fence and a meticulously kept garden. But as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. Emily was a spirited woman who, in her younger years, had been the life of every gathering. Now, at 38, she struggled to reconcile the vibrant woman she once was with the more subdued reality of her current life. Motherhood and marriage had brought joy but also a quiet restlessness that she couldn't quite articulate. Lately, small tensions had begun to creep into her relationship with Alex, the kind that fester when left unspoken. For Sophie, the world revolved around her parents. She idolized Alex, seeing him as her anchor in a sometimes chaotic world. Emily, on the other hand, was Sophie's confidant, her partner in art projects and shared secrets. The family had its routines, its traditions, and its moments of quiet happiness, but cracks had started to form beneath the surface. It was on a chilly Saturday afternoon in October that the first significant rift appeared. Alex had returned home from work later than usual, his tie slightly askew and his expression unusually tense. The weekend was supposed to be their time, no distractions, just family. Emily had planned a movie night, complete with popcorn and Sophie's favorite animated film. But as the hours ticked by, Alex's absence cast a shadow over their plans. When he finally walked through the door, Emily's carefully prepared dinner had gone cold. She greeted him with a half-hearted smile, trying to mask her frustration. "What kept you?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "Work," Alex replied tersely, shrugging out of his coat. "Deadlines." Sophie looked up from her coloring book in the living room, sensing the tension in her parents' exchange. She knew better than to ask questions when they were like this. The following week, Emily's restlessness boiled over during a mundane errand. She and Sophie had gone to the mall to buy a new backpack for school. Sophie's old one had seen better days, and Emily insisted on replacing it. As they passed an electronics store, Sophie pointed excitedly at a display. "Mom, look! The new iPhone," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with awe. Emily glanced at the sleek, metallic device encased in glass. It was the iPhone 16 Pro Max, the latest model. She paused, drawn to its promise of luxury and efficiency. "That's gorgeous," she murmured, half to herself. Her current phone was a few models old, its once vivid screen now slightly cracked. That evening, over dinner, Emily casually brought it up. "Alex, have you seen the new iPhone? It's incredible." Alex raised an eyebrow but kept his focus on his plate. "I've seen the ads. It's nice. I was thinking," Emily continued, her voice carefully measured, "maybe it's time to upgrade. Mine is really showing its age." Alex hesitated before responding. "Emily, do we really need to spend that kind of money right now? Sophie's school fees are due, and the holidays are coming up." The dismissal stung more than Emily cared to admit. She didn't push further, but a seed of resentment had been planted. In the weeks that followed, Emily's demeanor shifted. She became more withdrawn, her once warm smiles now tinged with something else, something Alex couldn't quite identify. Sophie noticed it too, though she was too young to understand what was happening. Then came the comment that changed everything. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Alex casually mentioned a promotion he was pursuing. "If this goes through, we'll be in a much better position financially," he said, looking at Emily with hope. She barely looked up from her phone. "Even my friend Jacob can buy me a new iPhone just for sleeping with him," she said flatly. "I sleep with you every day and get nothing." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sophie, seated nearby, froze, her eyes darting between her parents. Alex's face turned a deep shade of red, his hands clenching into fists. "Emily," he said, his voice shaking, "what did you just say?" She met his gaze with a defiance he hadn't seen before. "You heard me." The room erupted in chaos. Sophie fled upstairs as Alex's voice rose in anger. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard, couldn't fathom that the woman he loved would say something so cruel. This was the beginning of their unraveling, a tale of betrayal, confrontation, and a young girl caught in the crossfire of her parents' choices. Alex stood in the quiet of the living room, Emily's words echoing in his mind like a relentless drumbeat. The audacity of her statement, the casual cruelty with which she delivered it, was unlike anything he'd ever experienced in their years together. His fists unclenched, trembling slightly as the adrenaline faded, leaving only a cold, hollow ache. Upstairs, he could hear Sophie's bedroom door close with a soft click, the sound cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. Emily, for her part, seemed unaffected, scrolling through her phone with an air of defiance. She perched on the edge of the couch, her legs crossed elegantly, as though nothing had happened. Alex's chest tightened as he watched her, trying to reconcile this distant, callous woman with the person he had once adored. "Emily," he said finally, his voice low and steady, though the effort it took to maintain control was monumental. "Do you even hear yourself? Do you understand what you just said?" She didn't look up, her thumb flicking against the screen. "I told the truth. Isn't that what you always say you want? Honesty?" Alex took a step closer, struggling to keep his composure. "Honesty? That wasn't honesty, that was cruel. And who the hell is Jacob?" At this, Emily's fingers stilled, and she raised her eyes to meet his. There was no trace of apology, no flicker of regret. Instead, her gaze was cold, appraising. "Just a friend," she said simply. "Not that it matters. You're the one who decided my needs don't matter, Alex. This isn't just about a phone, it's about the principle. I give everything to this family, and what do I get in return?" Alex stared at her, the weight of her words settling like stones in his gut. "A friend," he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "And what exactly does this friend give you that I don't?" Emily shrugged, a faint smile playing at her lips. "At least he listens to me. That's more than I can say for you." A red haze clouded Alex's vision, but his voice remained eerily calm. "You don't think I listen? I work overtime to keep this house running. I've sacrificed weekends, vacations, time with my daughter, all to give you the life you wanted." Emily's laugh was sharp, cutting. "Oh, please. Don't act like a martyr, Alex. You've been checked out for years. You think putting food on the table is enough? Newsflash, it's not. I've been lonely, and maybe Jacob isn't perfect, but at least he doesn't make me feel invisible." The air in the room grew heavier, the tension almost tangible. Alex's hands twitched at his sides as he fought the urge to explode. His mind raced, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Late nights out. Her sudden interest in dressing up. The distant way she'd been behaving lately. It all led back to one undeniable truth. "You've been cheating," he said, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, sharp and cutting. Emily didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, leaning back against the couch as though the conversation had drained her. "Maybe I wouldn't have needed to if you'd paid attention to me. Ever think of that?" The room spun, and Alex staggered back, steadying himself against the edge of the coffee table. His breath came in shallow bursts, anger and hurt swirling in his chest. This was his wife, the mother of his child. The woman he had promised to love and cherish. And she had shattered that trust without a second thought. Before he could respond, Sophie's voice called softly from the top of the stairs. "Dad? Are you okay?" Alex turned, his expression softening as he saw his daughter's worried face peeking around the corner. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "Go back to bed. Everything's okay." But Sophie hesitated, her eyes darting between her parents. She wasn't convinced, and Alex couldn't blame her. He had spent years teaching her to trust her instincts, and right now, her instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. "I'll tuck you in," Alex said gently, moving toward the stairs. He needed a moment to breathe, to think, to figure out how to salvage what was left of his family. As he climbed the stairs, he heard Emily mutter something under her breath, but he didn't stop to ask what. His focus was on Sophie, his anchor, his reason for staying grounded when his world was crumbling. He led her back to her room, sitting beside her on the bed as she pulled the covers up to her chin. "Is Mom mad at you?" Sophie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alex hesitated, then shook his head. No, sweetie. We just had a disagreement. Grown-ups argue sometimes, but it doesn't mean we don't care about each other. Sophie frowned, studying his face with a perceptiveness beyond her years. But you don't look happy, Dad. You look sad. Alex's heart broke a little more at her words, but he forced himself to smile. I'm okay, kiddo. I promise. You just focus on getting some sleep, all right? She nodded reluctantly, snuggling into her pillow. Alex stayed until her breathing evened out, then slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Downstairs, Emily was gone. Her car keys were missing from the hook by the door, and the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. Alex sat heavily on the couch, his mind racing. He couldn't let this go on. Not for Sophie's sake, and not for his own. The decision came swiftly, cold and final. Divorce. It was a word he never thought he'd associate with his own marriage, but now it loomed like an inevitability. Alex knew the road ahead would be painful and messy, but it was the only way to reclaim his dignity, and his life. The wheels were in motion. There was no turning back now. Alex woke the next morning to the sound of birds chirping outside the bedroom window, but their song did little to lift the oppressive weight pressing on his chest. Emily hadn't come home last night, and her absence had been both a relief and a confirmation. As he sat up in bed, his mind churned with anger and disbelief at everything that had unraveled in less than 24 hours. He thought of Sophie sleeping soundly down the hall and resolved to shield her from as much of the fallout as possible. She deserved better than this storm of betrayal and bitterness. But how could he protect her when his own life was being ripped apart? By mid-morning, Emily walked through the front door as though nothing had happened, her purse slung over her shoulder and her phone in hand. She wore the same defiant expression that had haunted Alex since last night. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor, their sharp rhythm matching the pounding in Alex's head. "Where were you?" he asked evenly, though his voice carried a dangerous undercurrent. "Out," Emily replied, dropping her purse on the counter. She didn't elaborate, and Alex's temper flared. "Out with Jacob?" The name came out like a curse. Emily raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "And if I was? How dare you?" Alex's voice rose, filling the space between them. "You come back here after everything you said last night and throw this in my face?" She crossed her arms, her defiance unwavering. "Oh, please, Alex. Spare me the wounded act. If you cared half as much as you pretend to, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." Alex felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. "Do you hear yourself? Do you understand what you're doing to this family? To Sophie?" Emily rolled her eyes. "Sophie's fine. She's not a baby anymore. She'll understand someday that her father was too cheap and selfish to keep his wife happy." Alex froze, the words slicing through him like a knife. "What did you just say?" Emily stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "I said you're cheap. Even Jacob, someone I barely know, knows how to treat a woman. You give me nothing but excuses. No gifts. No attention. No passion. You barely even look at me anymore." His vision blurred with anger, and before he could stop himself, his hand shot out, delivering a sharp slap across her cheek. The sound echoed through the house, silencing even the birds outside. Emily stumbled back, her hand flying to her face as she stared at him, wide-eyed. The air between them was electric, charged with shock and fury. Alex's hand trembled as he pulled it back, immediately regretting what he had done. "Emily," he started, his voice shaking. "I don't," she hissed, cutting him off. Her eyes blazed with fury now, her hand still pressed to her reddening cheek. "Don't you dare try to apologize." "That's it," Alex said, his voice hardening. "I'm done. We're done. I'm filing for divorce." Emily's laughter was cold and brittle, like shards of glass. "You think that scares me? Go ahead, Alex. File for divorce. You'll just prove what I've been saying all along, that you're a coward who can't handle the truth." Alex didn't respond. He turned on his heel and headed for the stairs, his steps heavy with finality. Sophie's door was ajar, and he hesitated outside, wondering if she had heard the commotion. Peeking inside, he saw her sitting on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. "Dad?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" He knelt beside her, his heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. Mom and we're not doing well right now. But I promise you, I'll always be here for you. Are you going to leave?" Sophie's voice was small, but her question hit him like a freight train. "No," he said firmly, taking her hand in his. "I'll never leave you, Sophie. No matter what happens, you're the most important thing to me." Sophie nodded, but her eyes filled with tears, and Alex pulled her into a tight embrace. As he held her, he made a silent vow to fight for custody. Sophie needed stability, and he couldn't trust Emily to provide it, not when she was so consumed by selfishness and her affair with Jacob. Later that day, Alex called his lawyer. The conversation was brief but decisive, setting the wheels in motion for the end of his marriage. As he hung up, he felt an odd mixture of relief and sorrow. His life was about to change irrevocably, but perhaps in that change lay the chance for something better, for him and for Sophie. Downstairs, Emily had retreated to the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear as she whispered angrily into the receiver. Alex didn't need to guess who she was talking to. He walked past her without a word, grabbing his keys and heading for the door. As he drove through the neighborhood, he thought about the man he had been before all of this, optimistic, loving, devoted to his family. That man felt like a stranger now, buried under layers of betrayal and heartbreak. But as the sun set and the streets grew darker, Alex resolved to find himself again. He owed it to Sophie, and to the life they could still build together. Alex sat in the lawyer's office, the sterile air of the room amplifying the weight of the decision he had just made. The divorce papers lay before him, a tangible symbol of the broken trust and betrayal that had led to this moment. His attorney, a calm and efficient woman named Margaret, reviewed the documents with a practiced precision. Her presence was steadying, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in his mind. "Filing for sole custody is a bold move," Margaret said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Are you sure this is the route you want to take? These battles can get ugly, and Sophie might be caught in the middle." Alex's jaw tightened. "I'm sure. Emily isn't stable. She's putting her needs above Sophie's well-being. I won't let her drag Sophie through the mess she's created." Margaret nodded, making a note. "All right. We'll need evidence of her instability and any documentation you have regarding the affair." Alex thought back to the night before, the slap, the venom in Emily's words, the way she had flaunted her infidelity without shame. The memory was still raw, but it only solidified his resolve. "I'll get you what you need." Back home, Alex found Emily sitting on the couch, her legs crossed elegantly, as though she hadn't spent the morning arguing with Jacob over the phone. She barely acknowledged Alex as he entered the room, scrolling through her phone with a slight smirk on her lips. "Where's Sophie?" Alex asked, keeping his voice measured. "She's at a friend's house," Emily replied without looking up. "She needed a break from all the tension. I thought it would be good for her." Alex bristled at her nonchalant tone. "Funny, considering you're the one creating the tension." Emily finally looked up, her expression hardening. "Oh, don't start with me, Alex. You've already made it clear how little you value this marriage. Filing for divorce just proves it." "I value Sophie," Alex shot back. "Unlike you, I'm thinking about what's best for her." Emily laughed bitterly. "Don't pretend this is about Sophie. This is about you trying to control me, always has been." "That's rich, coming from someone who's been sneaking around with Jacob," Alex said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're the one who destroyed this family." Emily stood abruptly, her eyes blazing. "And you think you're some kind of saint? You've ignored me for years, Alex. You buried yourself in work and left me to feel like nothing more than a housekeeper. Jacob noticed me. He made me feel alive again, something you stopped doing a long time ago." Alex took a step closer, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "You could have talked to me, Emily. We could have worked through it. But instead, you chose to throw it all away for someone who doesn't care about you the way I once did." Her laugh was sharp and cutting. "Save the self-righteous act. You're no victim here. The conversation spiraled, each word another dagger cutting into the fragile remnants of their relationship. Alex clenched his fists at his sides, forcing himself to stay calm. Sophie didn't need to hear another shouting match. Enough, Alex said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I won't do this anymore. I've already filed for divorce. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Emily's face paled for a moment before she recovered, her lips curving into a defiant smile. Fine. But don't think for a second that I'll let you take Sophie away from me. She's my daughter, Alex. You can't just erase me from her life. We'll see what the court has to say about that, Alex said coldly, turning toward the stairs. He paused halfway up, looking back at her one last time. For Sophie's sake, I hope you figure out what matters before it's too late. Emily didn't respond. She simply watched him go, her expression unreadable. That night, Alex sat in Sophie's room, reading to her as she snuggled under the covers. Her favorite book, one they'd read countless times, offered a brief reprieve from the turmoil outside. As he closed the book, Sophie looked up at him with wide, worried eyes. Are you and Mom really getting a divorce? She asked softly. Alex hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sweetheart. But that doesn't change how much I love you. That will never change. Will I have to live with Mom? Sophie's voice was small, trembling with fear. Alex took her hand, his heart breaking at the uncertainty in her gaze. We'll figure it out together. But I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. Sophie nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I want to stay with you, Dad. Alex kissed her forehead, his resolve strengthening with her words. We'll make it work. I promise. As Sophie drifted off to sleep, Alex sat beside her, watching her peaceful face. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for Sophie, he was willing to face whatever came his way. This wasn't just a fight for custody, it was a fight for her future. And he wasn't about to lose. The court hearing was set for a brisk December morning, the chill in the air mirroring the cold tension between Alex and Emily as they sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. Alex's lawyer, Margaret, presented a meticulous case, documented evidence of Emily's infidelity, testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed her frequent absences, and a clear depiction of her emotional neglect toward Sophie. Emily, for her part, clung to a narrative of Alex as a distant and unloving husband. Her lawyer painted her as a mother who, despite her flaws, deeply cared for her child and wanted to remain in her life. But her arguments wavered under the weight of Alex's evidence, each piece a nail in the coffin of her credibility. The judge's decision came swiftly. Sole custody was awarded to Alex, with supervised visitation for Emily. As the gavel struck, Alex exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief flooded him, though it was tinged with sadness. This wasn't the victory he had ever wanted, it was the one he had been forced to fight for. Outside the courthouse, Sophie ran to Alex, wrapping her arms around him tightly. We're going to be okay, right, Dad? She asked, her voice muffled against his coat. Alex knelt, holding her close. Yes, Sophie. We're going to be more than okay. I promise. Emily stood at a distance, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. For a fleeting moment, Alex thought he saw regret flicker across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the icy pavement, leaving behind the remnants of a life she had once built and then shattered. That night, Alex and Sophie sat in their living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting warmth over their small Christmas tree. It wasn't extravagant, just a modest tree they had decorated together, its ornaments unevenly spaced but filled with love. Sophie's laughter as she hung the final star had been the sweetest sound Alex had heard in months. As Sophie dozed off on the couch, her head resting against his shoulder, Alex gazed into the fire, feeling the first true sense of peace in what felt like forever. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like a road worth traveling. He kissed Sophie's forehead and whispered, "We'll make a new beginning, sweetheart. Just you and me." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in a quiet, pristine white, a fresh start, just as Alex hoped their lives could be. What would you do in Alex's place? Was his choice to fight for Sophie the right one? Share your thoughts and let's discuss.